Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of the Happy Half Hour. You know how I can tell it's a happy half hour? Because it says back there on that beautiful big screen that it's the Happy Half Hour. Look at that.
Wow.
Where are we even?
Look at you using context clues.
Is this the Bat Cave? This is dramatically lit. We're on video. What's going on?
If this is the Batcave, does that make podcast Matt Alford?
Something like that. I don't know. Does that make you Robin? Will you wear a mask? We've got shelves back here. We can put our own items on those in future episodes. We can have a lot of fun with this.
Right.
I don't know that anybody's thought this through completely, but
there's going to be a Bojangles box back there.
There could be a Bojangles box. There could be a jar of mayonnaise. There are all kind of possibilities for what could happen back there on those shelves. We might turn that into a little game here on the Happy Half Hour. Is identify Darin's item of the week. We could. I'm brainstorming this in real time. You know what this is like? This is like the Blueprint version of the Happy Half Hour.
You're going
behind the scenes. You're seeing how it gets made. How about that Blueprint, everybody? Y'all watch that, right? You watch that, right?
If you haven't, you can pause this. Actually, no, wait. Finish this and then go watch it.
Finish this, circle back. Yeah. And then if you have watched it, watch it again and patronize our many sponsors. Panthers Blueprint, of course, is brought to us by Coca-Cola. But yeah, how about Blueprint? That was it's really one of the cool projects of the year is doing that behind the scenes stuff. Because we talk about this a lot here at Panthers.com. We have the opportunity to give people stuff that they can't get anywhere else. And that kind of inside the draft room insight, you know, I wrote a 5,000-word version of it that came out over the weekend that kind of primes the pump for, you know, Blueprint coming out on video on Monday, and it all works together to kind of show you exactly how this draft class came together. And I think once people see it, it's like, holy smokes, the level of preparation that went into making that call blows people's minds.
We learned a lot from it. One thing I did want to note, though, is that it's also cool to realize that the players watch this and learn things that they didn't even know necessarily the team thought about them. I was sitting downstairs yesterday with Nick Scorton, and Ajero Evero walked by, and Nick stopped him and said, "Coach, I saw what you said about me on the Blueprint video. That was really cool. Like, thank you for that. Like you know, kind of pounding the table for me." And Evero was like, "Hey, man, like I meant every bit of it. You deserved it." And he walked away, and Nick was like, "That was really cool to like hear them talk about me and like hear what they thought."
Right. You know, and there are so many little cool human elements. I mean, I love, when I wrote the story, one of the things I loved is the way Dan Morgan and Brant Tillis go back and forth. There's just, I use the line, they kind of remind me of Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly sometimes. They've got kind of a weird sense of humor amongst each other. And because this was a real thrown together relationship. Right. I mean, these two guys met each other on a Zoom call in January of 2024. And now they're kind of, they've reached the point of their relationship where they're finishing each other's sentences. They've got their little inside jokes and stuff. But when somebody in the room, Dave Tepper, you know, started busting Brant's chops a little bit about his socks. He's like, "What's with the socks?" And Brant tells the completely adorable personal anecdote, which I just loved as a dad. I mean, Brant's got a great story. The donut socks he was wearing in the draft room on night one were a gift from his daughter, because he and his daughter, when they lived in Kansas City, used to go get donuts every Tuesday morning. And now that she's here and Charlotte a little bit older, school keeps them from being able to get. And dads miss that kind of stuff. So the fact that his daughter bought him donut socks and he wore them to work on the biggest night of the year was a touching personal anecdote. And
we'll take it.
Pro tip, also, touching personal anecdote is an effective deterrent to sarcasm. Because when somebody's trying to light you up and then all of a sudden you say, "Well, my daughter bought me these socks."
Right.
It was very thoughtful and meaningful. Okay. So it's like, yeah, that one's over. So anyway, what else did you, as you kind of processed Blueprint, I mean, what was one of your takeaways from it as much as anything else?
There were a couple of things. Obviously, the part that a lot of people are talking about, and I think deservedly so, is the discussions about whether or not to take the trade with the Rams and to trade back. And you saw, because, you know, I think in 2024, we saw them kind of move all over the board all 3 days. And so the thinking was, okay, Dan loves to trade. Yeah. And you realize it's not so much that Dan loves to trade, it's Dan loves the right trade. And he wasn't going to move off of that spot unless he felt like he got something that was more than deserving of what that spot should have been. Right. Because they felt that convicted about T-Mac. Yeah. And that's not even necessarily to say the Rams would have come up and got T-Mac. They could have gone after somebody else. But it was like, okay, this is going to have to be something that is greater of a value than what we value T-Mac at. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't. And so to see that sort of conviction, and to your point, to know that they had spent months already kind of trying to lay this out, and here's our game plan. If scenario A happens, we do this. If scenario B happens, we do this. They had plans on top of plans. And so they could be sitting there with 2 minutes left to go on the clock, waiting on the phone to ring, and not necessarily be freaking out.
Right. And if it seems like all this is on purpose, it absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they do, and Brant talks about that a lot. They've been talking about all these scenarios for months at a time. They've already had the meeting. So when you watch Blueprint and you see, Brant look at Dan and say, all right, they're out, it was immediate. There was that immediate reaction of call T-Mac, And it looks knee-jerk, but it was well-studied. It was well-rehearsed. It was something they had planned on for months and months and months at a time. One of the things that I think's interesting to me as the person who is sitting in there kind of watching this all unfold and documenting it is, you've heard me say this, Cassidy, and I'll say this a lot. One of anything can't be a trend. So after last year, it was impossible to know, okay, there are teams that always want to trade up. There are teams that always want to trade back. Well, last year they were going in both directions, so it was impossible to know what they like doing. And I love the way Brant's like, I want action. He just wants to be moving around to maximize value. And when they were in that situation with the Rams, Dan flat out admitted, he said, if the Rams want to trade into this spot, it's going to be so much that we can't say no.
Right.
And, he basically admitted, too, he made an offer he hoped they would refuse, which indicates exactly how much they like Teteroa McMillan, the player, because we can talk about abstract concepts like value. We can talk about abstract concepts like future picks and stacking up assets and stuff like that. Ultimately, what they wanted was Teteroa McMillan on this football team. And that, I think, came clear in this video.
And you saw that kind of throughout the draft as it continued to go on. And you mentioned this in your draft story, too, a lot, that you heard the phrase, our guy, our guy, our guy. Because everybody kind of has a different draft philosophy. It's, do you want to go after the best player, the best available, your guy, position of need, da-da-da-da-da. And you saw them not necessarily, like some teams, and not to say one way is right or wrong, it's just everybody has a different philosophy. Some teams kind of let the board come to them. And you saw Dan, and I think Brant even made a comment, watching Dan in the draft room is like he attacks it the same way he did on the field. Like he sees this hole and then he takes it. He was willing to sit at 8 to get T-Mac. He didn't need to move to do that. And then on day 2, you saw him go, oh, wait, Nick Scorton is available. Princely Manuelin is available. Let's go get him.
Right.
And you saw him willing to kind of move up. So it was more so like, and you saw that on day 3 even. You saw it with Trevor Etienne, with Cam Jackson, with Lathan Ransom. It was kind of like, okay, we have these 2 safeties we both like. And that one was a little bit more of let the board come to them, but it's because the board worked in the favor with the guy they wanted.
Right.
It was more about their guy than the board.
Right. And they had kind of, you go through this process, and there are a lot of guys they like. And they knew waiting from 8 to 57 was going to cause them to miss out on guys they liked a lot. So that's why, they kind of get to that spot. Runs on positions are real. When you saw a bunch of pass rushers start to go early, middle, second round, that's when they kind of get up on the balls of their feet. And it's like, all right, now we got to make a move because we like Nick sufficiently. We don't want to take a chance to lose him. And that's when you see them make that crazy deal with the Broncos where it's like 4 of ours for 4 of yours, and you're moving in a lot of different rounds. But it was because Nick Scorton was a guy they felt strongly about, wanted to add to this roster. And, Dan was kind of funny talking about the notion of who their guy was, because everybody in the world thought their guy was somebody else.
Right.
And somebody else the Falcons may have chosen 7 spots later. But they were content. They knew that they liked McMillan a lot. They liked that guy in Atlanta a lot, too, at certain points. And what happens is you get in that situation and you start weighing the balance of, okay, we could go pass rusher here, but then we know we want to go wide receiver. And as Dan explained it, he kind of liked the group of pass rushers that were going to be available in rounds 2 and 3 better than he liked the wide receivers that were available in rounds 2 or 3. So that was part of kind of what led them to this path of T-Mac and then the pass rushers.
Yeah, and it was a deep pass rushing class. You could be afforded to do that.
Yeah.
And there was lots more tidbits in there, so definitely go watch it. They're all here now, though. They've been on the field for a while now, 3 weeks.
Yep. And what's interesting to me watching these guys, and McMillan gets a lot of attention, being the first-round pick. You're a top 10 pick, you're going to get a lot of attention. That's just the way that goes. He is a sponge out there on the field. He has been put into a position that let me just say it up front. We don't know right now if this is all going to work, if he's going to turn into all-pro receiver or anything like that. What I know is he has been put into a position to succeed because early on he has dropped into a position room with a coach in Rob Moore who's respected and good at his job, but also with a couple of veterans in Adam Thielen and Hunter Renfrow. And to me, one of the interesting things about Tetaroa that makes me think there is a chance for this to work is watching the way he responds to Adam and Hunter on the practice field. Because those are a couple of guys who have made long careers for themselves, not based on being 6'4" with this big pterodactyl wingspan and hands that can catch anything. They've made their living in the NFL by being precise and doing their job a particular way and being just meticulous with the way they work. Watching them show him footwork, watching them show him route running, how to come out of a release, stuff like that. He's getting graduate level stuff. It's one thing when a coach tells you stuff, when you get it backed up from guys in your position room, that adds a layer to it. And he said it the other day. He said, I'm blessed to be able to have guys like that around early on.
And another part of the chemistry of that wide receiving core that I wasn't quite sure what it was going to look like was how he and Leggett got along. And granted, it's June.
Yeah.
And like we haven't even seen this group on the field together in a game. But we've both been around this sport long enough to know you get 2 first-round receivers in a group together that are close in the same age. There can sometimes be a little bit of competition.
Yeah.
Like, that personality comes out of like, oh, he might be taking my snaps. And that has not happened at all between those two.
Yeah.
They clicked very, very quickly early on.
Yeah, the people seem to get along.
Yeah.
And I
that
think
helps.
that's an important part of this thing too. I mean, it's not like this is summer camp. We're not singing Kumbaya around here. But
and like everybody still wants their snaps. Don't get us wrong, but like they clicked.
Yeah, I mean these two guys, they're both young. That's what's interesting about watching the construction of this team. Last year's team was kind of an older team, oddly enough, for a team in a first-year head coach, first-year GM. They were older last year kind of intentionally, and I think they've started to phase some of that out now and build with these young guys. You see second-year guys becoming more of a part of this thing. You see these young receivers in this room, and so there's an energy about having young people around that it's naturally occurring. It's not like they designed, we want to have these two guys with big personalities. It's let's see how these two guys get along, and they are getting along well. Watching the interaction, watching them throw the ball back and forth across the field to each other when one of them catches a pass. I mean, there's these little things where it's like, okay, the chemistry's good. This looks real.
And you and I have talked about this a couple of times. This is going to sound so cliche. So anybody listening to this podcast, just bear with us because it sounds cliche. But before the draft, Dan Morgan talked so much about like how important it was to find guys that love football. And you think, well, duh. And he's like, but that's not always the case.
Right.
And you see they brought in a class of free agents and rookies that do. And I don't know, it feels tangible, which, again, it's June. It's so early on. There's still a lot to go. But June is also when things can get a little mundane out there. Yeah. And that hasn't really been the case.
Yeah, and they also, one of the other things they did this offseason was invest significantly in a cat named J.C. Horn.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about somebody who loves football.
Right.
I will just say this, and there are people, comparisons make people nervous. When you start saying, oh, this guy's like this guy, people are afraid of the comparison, afraid of the bar you're going to set. I'm just going to explain this in a long way because that's what I do. Once upon a time, there was a quarterback named Cam Newton and a linebacker named Thomas Davis. And watching those two cats get after each other in practice was a spectacle unto itself.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times the practice, and we've talked to a bunch of people, this offseason already about some stuff you'll see later on at Panthers.com about that group, and the practices were incredible. The intensity of a practice with Thomas Davis and Luke Kuechly on one side, Cam Newton on the other side, it's like, holy cow. But the way Cam and TD chirped at each other created a different level. Now it's J.C. Horn and Bryce Young.
Right.
And let me say for the record, in case you aren't clear about this, Bryce Young is not like Cam Newton. In case I needed to clear that up for you. But watching Bryce kind of give it back to JC a little bit, watching JC make sure the guys on the other side are at the same level, it's like a lower key version of the same song.
Yeah.
And it's like,
or maybe the beginning version.
Well, I mean, it's a good thing for these guys because, again, these are young leaders of this team. When you talk about the people who are going to be a part of the Carolina Panthers for the future, Bryce Young, J.C. Horn are right up there near the top of the list. So having the guys being the ones who are creating the tempo, the guys being the ones who are bringing the energy to practice rather than it having to come from the top down.
Right.
That's where teams develop personality.
Right.
And to me, that's what I'm seeing from this bunch. I am always cautious about what we learn from an OTA because it's an OTA. They're not in pads. The linemen aren't hitting each other. No, there's no tackling or anything like that. It's not real football. It's like glorified 7-on-7.
Yeah.
But you can see that personality beginning to emerge. And that's going to be one of the interesting things to follow over the course of this season. And watching JC and Bryce get after it a little bit has been fun.
And there's been times, too, where Bryce has initiated those chirpings.
That's right.
And he'll let JC know. You mentioned it coming from the bottom up, not having to come from the top down.
Yep.
You and I were walking through the hallway the other day because we had heard Cooley kind of get fired up at practice that day and said something to him about it. And he said, oh, JC got me fired up. He got me going. So to your point, it is coming from the bottom up, and it's filtering up and not having to all come from the top.
Yeah. All of this stuff, I mean, you can kind of see the Carolina Panthers, as they stand right now, are still a very young team in their progression, going into a second year under a new GM and head coach. You're starting to see that develop a little bit, and there's a little bit of a vibe. You saw it second half of last year, and everything's about building on last year. So, we'll kind of see where that goes.
And it's very much still a process, but Dave Canales also spent all of last year saying we have to figure out who we are.
Yep.
Who are we going to be? We've got to know who we are before we can become who we are. And I think you've seen over the past year and into now them kind of decide, okay, this is who we want to be. Now, how do we make it work?
Just little glimpses of who we want to be. So it's all interesting stuff. We've got one more week, basically. Next week will be the final week of off-season program, mini camp. We'll wrap everything up next week. And then we go into summer vacation mode for about, 5 or 6 weeks before we gather again for training camp. But a lot to be accomplished between now and then. We got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of stuff we want to tell you and show you here at Panthers.com, the YouTube channel, and all that cool stuff. So we've got a lot of good stuff coming your way. We've got a lot of good stuff behind us. We'll leave a little extra time so you've got time to go watch Blueprint again. I mean, it's not like you're working. You're listening to the happy half hour, for goodness sake.
Basically the weekend.
It's Little Friday here at the stadium. We should go ahead and take advantage of that. Watch Blueprint again, and we'll see you next time. We'll catch up with you next week as we wrap up OTAs and minicamp with another edition of the Happy Half Hour.